The golden nuggets, neon lights flickered against Robert Martinez's trembling hands as he pushed his company's deed across the felt table. $12 million. Gone, just like that. But what happened next would shock everyone in that smoky room. Maria Santos, the quiet casino cleaner who'd watched him lose everything, stepped forward with a crumpled napkin. On it, she'd written something that would change both their lives forever. Some say luck is random. Others believe it finds those who deserve it most. This is the story of how a janitor's wisdom saved a businessman's empire, and how a single bet on human kindness paid the ultimate jackpot. You're about to witness the most incredible comeback in casino history. Full screenplay, the autumn rain drummed against the windows of the Golden Nugget Casino as Robert Martinez sat hunched over the high-stakes poker table. His salt and pepper hair was disheveled, his usually pristine suit wrinkled from hours of agonizing play. The weight of his family's legacy pressed down on him like a suffocating blanket. "Your call, Mr. Martinez," the dealer announced, his voice cutting through the haze of cigarette smoke and desperation. Robert's hands shook as he looked at his cards one final time. Pair of tens. Not terrible, but not the miracle he needed. Across the table, Viktor Kozlov, a Russian oil magnate with dead eyes and a cruel smile, waited patiently. The man had been systematically destroying Robert's life for the past 6 hours, hand by hand, dollar by dollar. Robert's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I need a moment." The other players shifted uncomfortably. They could smell the desperation rolling off him in waves. These were sharks, and Robert was bleeding in the water. Behind him, Maria Santos quietly emptied the ashtrays and wiped down the unused chairs. She was 62, with weathered hands that had cleaned these tables for over 20 years. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her uniform was spotless despite the chaos around her. Most players never noticed the cleaning staff, but Maria noticed everything. She'd watched Robert Martinez play here before, back when he was confident and successful. Back when his construction company, Martinez and Associates, was thriving. Back when he wasn't gambling with money he couldn't afford to lose. "Time's up," Viktor said, his Russian accent thick with satisfaction. "What's it going to be, friend?" Robert looked at the pot. $400,000. More money than most people saw in a lifetime, but a drop in the bucket compared to what he'd already lost tonight. His company was gone. The contracts, the equipment, the employees who depended on him, all of it sacrificed to Viktor's relentless pursuit of victory. "I fold," Robert whispered, throwing his cards face down on the table. Viktor's laughter boomed across the casino floor. "Smart choice, though I must say, I'm disappointed. I was hoping you'd fight a little longer." As the Russian gathered his winnings, Robert felt something die inside him. 25 years of building his business, brick by brick, contract by contract. His father's dream, passed down to him, now reduced to nothing more than numbers on a balance sheet that Viktor would probably frame and hang in his Moscow office. "Actually," Viktor said, pausing as he stacked his chips, "there is one more thing I want from you." Robert looked up, hope flickering in his chest, despite himself. "Your company, Martinez and Associates. I want the deed transferred to me. Tonight." The hope died as quickly as it had been born. "Viktor, please. The company's already worthless. You've got my assets, my contracts. What more could you want?" "Sentiment," Viktor replied with a shark's grin. "I collect businesses the way other men collect stamps. Besides, there might be something valuable hidden in those dusty old files of yours." Robert knew he had no choice. The debt he'd accumulated tonight would crush him anyway. At least this way, it would be over quickly. "Fine," he said, his voice barely audible. "But I need something to write on." Viktor gestured to one of his associates, who began pulling legal documents from a briefcase. But before the man could hand them over, Maria Santos stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, addressing Robert. Her English carried the faint accent of someone who'd learned it as a second language, but her words were clear and precise. "Perhaps this will do." She held out a paper napkin, one of the cheap ones the casino provided at the bar. For a moment, Robert thought she was mocking him, but something in her eyes, a depth of understanding and compassion, made him look closer. On the napkin, In careful handwriting, she'd written, "Sometimes the greatest victories come from the smallest gestures. Trust in tomorrow." Miss Roberts stared at the message, confusion evident on his face. I don't understand." Maria's weathered hand gently touched his shoulder. "Mr. Martinez, I've been cleaning these tables for 23 years. I've seen men win fortunes and lose everything. But I've also seen something else. I've seen that true wealth isn't measured in chips or cards." Victor laughed harshly. "How touching. A philosophy lesson from the help. Can we get on with this? I have a flight to catch." But Robert couldn't take his eyes off the napkin. Something about Maria's words, about the kindness in her voice, stirred something deep within him. "What are you trying to tell me?" Maria glanced around the casino, then leaned closer to Robert. "I know about your company, about the Riverside project." Robert's blood ran cold. The Riverside project was a development contract he'd bid on months ago, a massive residential complex that would have saved his business if he'd won it. But the bidding process had been rigged, or so he'd assumed. The contract had gone to a competitor for half the price Robert had quoted. "How do you know about that?" "Because I cleaned the offices upstairs," Maria said simply, "including the office of Mr. Harold Jameson, the city planning commissioner." Victor was growing impatient. "If we could skip the cleaning lady's memoirs and get to the business at hand, ... But, Maria continued, ignoring the Russian's interruption. 3 weeks ago, I was emptying Mr. Jameson's trash when I found some very interesting papers. Papers that showed the Riverside project bidding was, how do you say, not entirely honest." Robert's heart began to pound. "What kind of papers?" "The kind that show kickbacks. The kind that show your competitor paying Mr. Jameson to ensure they won the contract. The kind that, if brought to the right people, might invalidate the entire bidding process." The casino seemed to fade away around Robert. The noise of slot machines, the chatter of other gamblers, even Victor's presence, all of it became background static as he processed what Maria was telling him. "Why didn't you come forward before?" Maria's smile was sad but gentle. "Because I'm just a cleaning lady, Mr. Martinez, who would believe me? But now, ... now you have nothing left to lose." Victor slammed his hand on the table. "Enough of this nonsense. Martinez, sign over your company, or I'll make sure you never work in this city again." But something had changed in Robert's demeanor. The defeated slump of his shoulders straightened. The hollow look in his eyes was replaced by a spark of determination. "You know what, Victor?" Robert said, his voice growing stronger. "I think I'll take that bet." "What bet?" Victor snarled. Robert held up the napkin Maria had given him. "One final hand. Winner takes all." The other players at the table suddenly paid attention. This was the kind of dramatic moment that legends were made of. "All of what?" Victor asked suspiciously. "Everything. If I win, you forgive my debt and return my company assets. If you win, you get Martinez and Associates, as agreed." Victor's eyes gleamed with avarice. "And what exactly are you betting with, my desperate friend? You have nothing left." Robert looked at Maria, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm betting on something you can't understand. I'm betting on integrity." "Integrity doesn't pay debts," Victor scoffed. "Maybe not," Robert admitted. "But it builds something more valuable than money. It builds trust." The dealer, who had been silently observing the exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Gentlemen, if you're going to play one final hand, might I suggest we make it interesting? 5-card draw, best hand wins." Victor shrugged. "Fine by me. Though I should warn you, Martinez, my luck has been exceptional tonight." As the dealer shuffled the cards, Robert closed his eyes and thought about his father. Roberto Martinez Sr. had come to America with nothing but a toolbox and a dream. He'd built the company from the ground up, always dealing honestly with clients and employees alike. Robert had inherited more than just a business. He'd inherited a legacy of integrity. The cards were dealt. Robert picked up his hand and nearly gasped. 4 hearts and a spade. He was 1 card away from a flush, a strong hand, but not unbeatable. Victor examined his cards with the poker face he'd perfected over years of high-stakes games. But Maria, who had positioned herself where she could see both hands, noticed something. Victor's left eye twitched almost imperceptibly when he was bluffing, a tell she'd observed over countless nights of cleaning around the poker tables. His eye wasn't twitching. "Cards?" the dealer asked. "I'll take one," Robert said, discarding the spade. Victor smiled coldly. "I'll stand pat." The dealer slid a single card to Robert. With trembling fingers, he lifted the corner and saw the 10 of hearts. A flush. His heart raced, but he kept his expression neutral. "Your bet," the dealer said to Robert. This was the moment. Robert looked at Maria, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. Then he looked at the napkin she'd given him, still clutched in his other hand. "I bet everything," Robert said quietly. "My company, my reputation, my future, everything." Victor's smile widened. "Call." They turned over their cards simultaneously. Victor had a full house, kings over eights, a powerful hand that would win 99 times out of 100. But Robert had his flush. The casino fell silent. Even the slot machines seemed too quiet as the impossible registered in everyone's minds. Victor stared at the cards in disbelief. That's impossible." "No," Robert said, his voice filled with quiet dignity. "That's justice." The Russian's face turned red with rage. "This isn't over, Martinez, I'll destroy you, ill." But his threats were interrupted by a commotion near the casino entrance. Hotel security was escorting several men in suits toward their table. The lead man flashed a badge. "FBI, he announced. "Mr. Viktor Kozlov, you're under arrest for money laundering and tax evasion." As the agents handcuffed Victor and read him his rights, Robert turned to Maria in amazement. "How did you—" "I told you," she said with a gentle smile. "I clean offices, including the FBI field office downtown. Agent Morrison is a very careless man who leaves interesting documents on his desk." The FBI agent overheard her comment and approached Maria. "Mrs. Santos, thank you for the tip. We've been investigating Mr. Kozlov for months, but we never had enough evidence until your information." Robert watched in amazement as the Russian was led away, still protesting his innocence. The other players began to disperse, whispering among themselves about the night's extraordinary events. "I don't understand," Robert said to Maria. "Why did you help me?" Maria began collecting the empty glasses from the table, her movements efficient and practiced. "Mr. Martinez, do you remember about 5 years ago when that young man Carlos Mendoza applied to work for your company?" Robert thought for a moment. "Carlos. Yes, I remember. He was just out of high school, no experience, but something about him impressed me. I hired him as an apprentice." "That young man is my grandson," Maria said softly. "You gave him a chance when no one else would. You trained him, promoted him, treated him with respect. Because of you, he now has a trade, a future." Robert felt tears welling up in his eyes. "I had no idea. You never asked for recognition. You simply did what was right. Tonight, I'm returning the favor." Over the following weeks, Robert's life changed in ways he never could have imagined. The evidence Maria had provided led to a full investigation of the Riverside Project bidding scandal. Commissioner Jameson was arrested and charged with corruption. The original contract was voided, and a new bidding process was ordered. This time, Martinez and Associates won the contract fair and square. The project was worth $12 million, exactly the amount Robert had lost that fateful night at the Golden Nugget. But the real transformation was in Robert himself. He implemented new policies at his company, ensuring fair wages and benefits for all employees. He established a scholarship fund for disadvantaged youth interested in the construction trades. And every month, he visited the Golden Nugget, not to gamble, but to have coffee with Maria Santos. 6 months after that incredible night, Robert stood in the partially completed Riverside development, watching as his crews worked to build homes for families who deserved them. Carlos Mendoza was now his foreman, leading a team of skilled craftsmen with the same integrity his grandfather had instilled in him. "Mr. Martinez," Carlos called out, "we've got a problem with the foundation on Building 7. Robert walked over to examine the issue, but instead of panic or frustration, he felt a calm confidence. Whatever the problem was, they would solve it. That's what good people do. They solve problems, they help each other, they build things that last." As he knelt to inspect the foundation, something fluttered out of his jacket pocket. It was the napkin Maria had given him that night, now carefully preserved in a protective sleeve. He read her words again. Sometimes, the greatest victories come from the smallest gestures. Trust in tomorrow. That evening, Robert returned to his office and pulled out a piece of company letterhead. He began to write, "To whom it may concern." The bearer of this letter, Mrs. Maria Santos, has demonstrated extraordinary character and integrity. She would be an asset to any organization fortunate enough to employ her. I recommend her without reservation for any position requiring trust, wisdom, and moral courage. He signed it with a flourish, sealed it in an envelope, and made a mental note to deliver it personally to the casino's general manager the next day. It was time Maria Santos received the recognition and opportunity she deserved. The following week, Maria was promoted to Casino Guest Services Manager, a position that came with a substantial salary increase and full benefits. When she called Robert to thank him, her voice was thick with emotion. "Mr. Martinez, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Robert replied. "You taught me something more valuable than any business lesson I ever learned. You taught me that integrity isn't just about following rules, it's about lifting others up, even when nobody's watching." "My grandmother used to say something," Maria said. "She said that angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they have mops and cleaning supplies." Robert laughed, a sound filled with genuine joy. "Your grandmother was a wise woman." As the months passed, the Riverside project became a model for ethical construction practices. Robert's company grew, but he never forgot the lessons of that night. He established a foundation that provided microloans to immigrant entrepreneurs, helping them start their own businesses. The foundation's motto, printed on a plaque in the lobby, read, "Sometimes the greatest victories come from the smallest gestures." 2 years later, Robert received a call that would change his life once more. It was from the mayor's office. The city was planning a massive infrastructure project, a new community center, and affordable housing complex that would serve thousands of families. They wanted Martinez and associates to lead the project. "Mr. Martinez," the mayor said during their meeting, "your reputation for integrity precedes you. This is a $20 million project, and we need someone we can trust completely." As Robert signed the contract, he thought about the napkin that had started it all. Such a small thing, a piece of paper with a few words of encouragement from a woman who saw potential in him when he saw only failure. That weekend, Robert organized a celebration at the Golden Nugget, not in the casino area, but in the hotel's elegant ballroom. He invited all his employees, their families, and of course, Maria Santos and her grandson Carlos. The theme was second chances, and Robert had prepared a speech he'd been thinking about for months. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, looking out at the faces of people who had believed in him. 2 years ago, I learned a lesson that changed my life forever. I learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or contracts or square footage. True wealth is measured in the lives we touch, the communities we build, and the legacy we leave behind. He gestured to Maria, who was sitting at the head table with her family. "I learned this lesson from a woman who cleaned tables for a living but possessed more wisdom than any CEO I've ever met. She taught me that sometimes the greatest victories come from the smallest gestures." The applause was thunderous, but Robert wasn't finished. "Tonight, I want to announce the establishment of the Santos Foundation for Ethical Business Practices. This foundation will provide grants and mentorship to small business owners who demonstrate integrity, compassion, and community service. Mrs. Maria Santos will serve as the foundation's first executive director." Maria stood up, tears streaming down her face, as the entire ballroom erupted in applause. Later, as the celebration wound down, she approached Robert. "You know," she said, "that night when I gave you the napkin, I never imagined it would lead to all this." Robert smiled. "What did you imagine?" "I imagined that maybe, just maybe, one good man wouldn't give up on himself. Everything else, this is just the interest on that investment." As the years passed, the Santos Foundation grew into a national organization that helped thousands of entrepreneurs build ethical, sustainable businesses. Robert's company became one of the most respected construction firms in the state, known not just for quality work, but for treating employees, subcontractors, and communities with unprecedented fairness. But perhaps the most important change was in Robert himself. The desperate, broken man who had signed away his company on a napkin had been replaced by someone who understood that true success isn't about what you accumulate, it's about what you give away. On the 5th anniversary of that fateful night, Robert stood once again in the Golden Nugget. But this time, he wasn't at a poker table. He was in the newly renovated community room, watching Maria conduct a workshop for aspiring entrepreneurs. The room was packed with men and women of all ages, all eager to learn how to build businesses that would make their communities stronger. Remember, Maria was telling the group, success isn't just about profit margins and growth charts. Success is about creating something that makes the world a little better than you found it. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. But what if you fail? What if you lose everything? Maria smiled, and Robert could see in her expression the same wisdom that had saved him 5 years earlier. Failure, she said, is just another word for a new beginning. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what's truly valuable. Sometimes the greatest victories come from the smallest gestures. After the workshop ended, Robert walked with Maria through the casino floor. The tables were busy, filled with people chasing dreams and fighting desperation in equal measure. But now, instead of seeing only the darkness of gambling, Robert saw something else. The human drama of hope and courage, of people taking risks because they believed in the possibility of something better. Do you ever regret it? Robert asked as they paused near the table where his life had changed. Helping me, I mean. You could have just minded your own business. Maria considered the question seriously. Mr. Martinez, my grandmother fled Mexico with nothing but her children and a belief that America was a place where good people could help each other build better lives. Every day I worked in this casino, I saw people destroying themselves, losing hope, giving up on tomorrow. She gestured to the bustling community room behind them, where workshop participants were still networking and sharing ideas. But that night, for the first time in 23 years, I saw an opportunity to prove my grandmother right. I saw a chance to show that good people really can help each other. How could I regret that? As they reached the casino exit, Robert pulled out his wallet and showed Maria something he'd carried every day for the past 5 years. The original napkin, now yellowed with age, but with her words still clearly visible. You know what this taught me, he said. It taught me that the most powerful force in the world isn't luck or money or even skill, it's human kindness. One person choosing to help another person, for no other reason than it's the right thing to do. Maria nodded. And what did you learn about taking risks? Robert laughed. I learned that sometimes, risk brings the greatest reward. But only when that risk is taken with integrity, with purpose, and with faith in the goodness of others. They walked out into the warm desert evening, past the flashing neon signs and the crowds of tourists, into a world that seemed brighter and more full of possibility than it had 5 years before. Behind them, in the Golden Nuggets community room, a young entrepreneur was showing his business plan to a potential mentor. The plan was written on a napkin, not because he couldn't afford better paper, but because he'd heard the story of Robert Martinez and Maria Santos, and he wanted to honor the tradition of believing that great things could come from the humblest beginnings. The mentor looked at the napkin, smiled, and said the words that would change the young man's life forever. Tell me more. And in that moment, the cycle continued. One person helping another, one small gesture creating ripples that would spread far beyond anything they could imagine. Sometimes the greatest victories really do come from the smallest gestures. All it takes is the courage to trust in tomorrow, the wisdom to see potential in others, and the faith to believe that a single act of kindness can change everything. In a world that often seems driven by greed and competition, the story of Robert Martinez and Maria Santos reminds us of a fundamental truth. We are all connected. We all need each other. And sometimes, the most valuable thing we can give to someone else isn't money or advice or even opportunity. Sometimes, the most valuable thing we can give is simply the belief that they matter, that their dreams are worth fighting for, and that tomorrow can be better than today. That's a bet worth taking. That's a risk worth the reward. And that's a story worth sharing. 10 years after that fateful night at the Golden Nugget, Robert Martinez stood at the podium of the International Conference on Ethical Business Practices. The conference was being held, fittingly, in Las Vegas, but this time at the convention center, not in a casino. He looked out at an audience of over 3,000 entrepreneurs, business leaders, and academics from around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert began, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had found his true purpose. I want to tell you about a napkin that changed my life. The audience chuckled, thinking it was a joke. But as Robert continued his story, the laughter faded into rapt attention. He spoke of that desperate night, of Maria's quiet wisdom, of the power of human connection in the darkest moments. In the front row, Maria Santos, now Dr. Maria Santos, having earned an honorary doctorate in social entrepreneurship from the University of Nevada, listened with pride. At 72, she had become one of the most respected voices in ethical business practices. Her book, The Napkin Philosophy, Building Success Through Human Kindness, had been translated into 17 languages. The Santos Foundation, Robert continued, has now helped over 50,000 entrepreneurs start ethical businesses in communities across North America. But the real measure of our success isn't in the numbers, it's in the lives changed, the communities strengthened, and the belief restored that business can be a force for good. After his speech, Robert was approached by a young woman with determined eyes and calloused hands. "Mr. Martinez," she said, "my name is Elena Rodriguez. I'm a single mother working 3 jobs, trying to save money to start a catering business. I heard your story, and I have something to show you." She pulled out a worn piece of paper, not a napkin, but a receipt from a grocery store. On the back, in careful handwriting, was a business plan for Elena's kitchen, authentic Mexican cuisine for corporate events. "I wrote this on my lunch break," she explained. "I know it's not much, but it's my dream." Robert looked at the receipt, remembering his own moment of desperation and hope. "Elena, would you like to meet someone special?" He led her to Maria, who was signing copies of her book at a nearby table. "Maria, I'd like you to meet Elena Rodriguez. She has something you need to see." Maria examined the receipt with the same careful attention she had given to everything else in her life. After a few moments, she looked up at Elena with a smile that seemed to light up the entire convention center. "Elena dear, this isn't just a business plan. This is a blueprint for bringing families together through food. That's something the world needs more of." Over the next hour, Maria and Elena talked about recipes, customers, suppliers, and dreams. By the end of their conversation, Elena had been accepted into the Santos Foundation's Advanced Entrepreneurship Program, complete with a startup grant, mentorship, and access to a network of successful business owners. "But why?" Elena asked, overwhelmed by the generosity. "You don't even know me." Maria's answer was simple, because 10 years ago, someone took a chance on a man who had lost everything. That man took a chance on me. Now it's your turn to carry the torch forward. 6 months later, Elena's Kitchen was catering events across the Las Vegas metropolitan area. Her specialty was family-style business lunches that brought corporate teams together around authentic Mexican food and conversation. Her business model wasn't just about profit, it was about creating connections, building community, and proving that success could be measured in relationships as well as revenue. But Elena wasn't the only one whose life had been transformed by that conference. Dr. James Patterson, a business professor from Harvard, had attended Robert's speech and been profoundly moved by the story. He returned to Boston with a new mission: to integrate ethical business practices into the core curriculum of one of America's most prestigious business schools. "We've been teaching our students how to maximize profits," Dr. Patterson told his colleagues during a faculty meeting. "But we haven't been teaching them how to maximize human potential. It's time to change that." The result was the Patterson-Santos Initiative for Ethical Leadership, a program that required all MBA students to complete a capstone project focused on creating businesses that served both profit and purpose. The program's motto, inspired by Maria's original napkin message, was simple: small gestures, great victories. Meanwhile, Carlos Mendoza had grown from Robert's apprentice to a successful contractor in his own right. His company, Mendoza Construction, specialized in affordable housing projects that incorporated sustainable building practices and community input. He had never forgotten the lessons he learned working under Robert's guidance. My grandfather always told me that a man's character is measured not by what he builds for himself, but by what he builds for others. Carlos explained to a group of young apprentices during a job site training session. Mr. Martinez showed me what that meant in practice. The housing projects that Carlos led weren't just about providing shelter, they were about creating communities. Each development included common spaces where residents could gather, community gardens where families could grow their own food, and makerspaces where neighbors could share skills and resources. One of his most successful projects was the Riverside Commons, the same development that had saved Robert's business a decade earlier. But now it had grown into something much larger, a model community that attracted visitors from around the world who wanted to learn about sustainable, community-centered development. The success stories continued to multiply, each one building on the foundation that Maria and Robert had established that night at the Golden Nugget. There was David Chen, a former software engineer who used his Santos Foundation grant to create an app that connected immigrant families with local volunteer English tutors. There was Sarah Williams, a retired teacher who started a literacy program that operated out of local businesses, turning coffee shops and barbershops into impromptu classrooms. Each entrepreneur who succeeded through the Santos Foundation was asked to make one commitment: to help at least 3 other aspiring entrepreneurs along their journey. This pay-it-forward philosophy created an exponentially growing network of ethical business leaders who measured success not just in personal achievement, but in community impact. The ripple effects reached far beyond individual businesses. Cities that hosted multiple Santos Foundation entrepreneurs began to see measurable improvements in unemployment rates, community cohesion, and local economic development. The Foundation's annual impact report showed that for every dollar invested in their programs, local communities saw an average return of $12 in economic activity, job creation, and social services. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of success came from the personal stories. Like Marcus Thompson, a former gang member from Detroit who used his foundation training to start an urban farming cooperative that employed at-risk youth. Or Rachel Kim, a Korean immigrant who created a translation service that helped other immigrants navigate healthcare and legal services. Each story was unique, but they all shared common themes: the power of human connection, the importance of serving others, and the belief that business could be a force for positive change in the world. On the 15th anniversary of that night at the Golden Nugget, Robert and Maria returned to the casino one final time. The gaming floor looked much the same as it had years before. The same flashing lights, the same sounds of slot machines, the same atmosphere of hope and desperation that defined Las Vegas. But something had changed. Near the entrance to the casino, there was now a small bronze plaque that read, "In memory of the night when a janitor's wisdom and a businessman's courage proved that the greatest gambles are the ones we take on each other." The plaque had been installed by the casino's current owner, a consortium of Santos Foundation entrepreneurs who had purchased the Golden Nugget and transformed it into something unprecedented. A casino that donated 50% of its profits to local community development projects. "You know," Maria said as they stood before the plaque, "I never thought that giving you a napkin would lead to all this." Robert smiled, thinking of all the lives that had been changed, all the communities that had been strengthened, all the proof that human kindness really could change the world. "Maria, you didn't just give me a napkin that night. You gave me back my faith in humanity. You showed me that even in the darkest moments, there are always people willing to help, to believe, to take a chance on something better." They walked through the casino one more time, past the tables where fortunes were won and lost, past the desperate and the hopeful, past all the human drama that made Las Vegas the unique place it was. But now, instead of seeing only the potential for destruction, they saw something else: the potential for redemption, for second chances, for the kind of transformation that happens when good people choose to help each other. As they reached the exit, a young casino employee approached them. His name tag read Michael Santos Martinez. He was Carlos Mendoza's son, working part-time while he studied business at the University of Nevada. "Excuse me," he said nervously, "aren't you Robert Martinez and Dr. Santos?" When they confirmed their identities, the young man's face lit up with excitement. I just wanted to thank you. I'm in the Patterson Santos program at UNLV, and your story inspired me to change my major from finance to social entrepreneurship. I want to start a business that helps casino workers like my great-grandmother transition to other careers if they want to." Maria and Robert exchanged a look that said everything they needed to say to each other. The cycle was continuing. The next generation was taking up the torch, and the ripple effects of that night 15 years ago were still spreading outward in ways they never could have imagined. "What's your business idea?" Robert asked. Michael pulled out his phone and showed them an app he'd been developing. "It's called Second Deal, like getting a second chance at cards, but for life. It connects casino workers with training programs, educational opportunities, and alternative career paths. We've already had 300 people sign up for the beta test." Maria looked at the app interface, impressed by its thoughtful design and comprehensive approach. "This is excellent work, Michael. Have you applied for a Santos Foundation grant?" "I was afraid to," Michael admitted. "I mean, you probably get thousands of applications, and I'm just a college student with an idea." Robert laughed, remembering his own fear and uncertainty from so many years ago. "Michael, do you know what the first requirement is for a Santos Foundation grant?" The young man shook his head. "Courage," Robert said simply. "The courage to believe that you can make a difference, even when you're not sure how. The courage to take a risk on something bigger than yourself. You've already shown that courage by developing this app and approaching us tonight." 3 months later, Michael's app Second Deal launched with full Santos Foundation support. Within its first year, it helped over 1,500 casino workers transition to new careers in healthcare, education, construction, and social services. The program was so successful that other cities began adopting similar models for their own service industry workers. But the real victory wasn't in the numbers, it was in stories like that of Janet Morrison, a 55-year-old cocktail waitress who used the app to find training as a medical assistant and was now working at a community health clinic. Or Tommy Rodriguez, no relation to Alina, a former dealer who discovered a passion for teaching and was now running an after-school program for at-risk children. Each success story reinforced the fundamental truth that Maria had written on that napkin so many years ago. Sometimes, the greatest victories really do come from the smallest gestures. As Robert reflected on the journey from that desperate night at the poker table to the global movement that had grown from Maria's simple act of kindness, he realized that the most important lesson wasn't about business success or community development or even personal redemption. The most important lesson was about the interconnectedness of human lives, about the way that one person's choice to show compassion can create cascading effects that touch thousands of people across generations. Every time someone chose to help a stranger, to take a risk on an unproven idea, to believe in someone else's potential, even when they couldn't see it themselves, every time that happened, they were participating in something larger than any individual success story. They were participating in the ongoing creation of a world where business success and human flourishing weren't competing values, but complementary ones. A world where taking care of each other wasn't just morally right, but economically smart. A world where the smallest gestures really could lead to the greatest victories. That night, as Robert drove home through the glittering Las Vegas Strip, he thought about all the people whose lives had been changed by that original napkin message. Entrepreneurs who had built successful businesses, families who had found stability and hope, communities that had been strengthened by the network of ethical business leaders who chose profit with purpose over profit at any cost. But mostly, he thought about Maria Santos, the quiet woman who had seen potential in a broken man and chosen to act on that vision. She had taught him that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or assets or even business success. It was measured in the number of lives you touched, the communities you helped build, and the hope you created for the next generation. Tomorrow, Robert would wake up and continue the work of building businesses that served both profit and purpose. He would mentor new entrepreneurs, support community development projects, and look for opportunities to pay forward the kindness that had saved his life. But tonight, he simply drove home through the desert darkness, grateful for napkins and second chances, for the courage of cleaning ladies and the power of human connection, for the truth that sometimes the greatest victories really do come from the smallest gestures. And somewhere in Las Vegas, a young entrepreneur was writing a business plan on the back of a receipt, believing just as Alina and Michael and thousands of others had believed that tomorrow could be better than today, that dreams were worth fighting for, and that somewhere out there was someone willing to take a chance on those dreams. The cycle continued, one small gesture at a time, one act of faith at a time, one human connection at a time. Sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of human kindness and second chances, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your own stories of unexpected angels in the comments below. Sometimes we all need to be reminded that no matter how dark the night seems, dawn is always just one act of kindness away. Remember, every small gesture has the potential to become a great victory. Every act of compassion creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. And every person you meet is carrying dreams that deserve to be supported, believed in, and given a chance to flourish. Take the risk, make the gesture, trust in tomorrow. The world is waiting for your contribution to the endless cycle of human kindness that makes all our victories possible. Because sometimes, the greatest victories really do come from the smallest gestures. And sometimes, trust in tomorrow is all we need to change everything.